Hi, this is Sandra Webster, and today I'm going to show you how I make bread. Let's hope this works. And so I've started off with a bowl, and it's got water in it. The water is warm to the touch, and I put in some yeast. I buy my yeast by the pound. It's much cheaper that way, and so I'm just going to put in 2 spoonfuls. Just sprinkle it in, and I'll stir it around a little bit. You can see what it looks like in there, maybe. And while that is bubbling up, and it is bubbling up, I get some honey, and I'm going to just put in some honey. I don't use an actual recipe, I just sort of guess. So that was probably about 2 tablespoons, except for the part that just came off on my fingers. You can use sugar, any kind of sweet thing, but the yeast needs food. And so I stirred that around. While it's proofing, I'm going to mix, so I'm going to warm some milk, because if you put cold milk into that, it'll retard the yeast from growing. So I'm going to heat this up in a microwave about 45 seconds. I wash the honey off my fingers, and I usually like to put some sort of fat into my bread to make it a little more tender. So this is just canola oil. I use olive oil, I use butter, I don't use Crisco. I could possibly use lard, I never have. And you don't actually have to have any. Now, look at this. And you can see how it's beginning to bubble. And that tells me that the yeast is actually live yeast, and it's growing already. So the milk is out. And I'm going to feel it with my fingers. Ooh, it's a bit hot. I'm going to put the oil in with the milk. And I'm going to put in about a teaspoonful or so of salt. And is this how I do it every week? Yes. Is it always the same? Well, probably it's always a little different. That's Webster Surprise. So I need to feel it to make sure that, oh good, it's just the right warm. And I mix it in. So now I have inside my bowl a lot of liquid, and that's all. All that I have to add now is the flour. And here's my flour. I have 2 kinds of flour, whole wheat, and I have what's called bread flour. It's a kind of Hummer flour. That's the kind that they call it where I get it. And if I only put in whole wheat, there wouldn't be enough gluten for the rise to work. I usually put in about half and half. Sometimes I'll put in a little more, sometimes a little less. It depends on what I want. And I start off with about 6 cups. And that should be about 6 cups. I mix it with my wooden spoon. Mix it all around in the bowl. And see how sticky it gets. It's pretty gloopy right now. It's warm. It smells a little sweet, a lot yeasty. And as I get it, I had rather more liquid this time since I don't measure. You know, I have to basically do this by feel. And so clearly it needs another couple cups. So I've added 2 more cups, and I mix it around. It gets pretty stiff, and that's fine. I'm mixing it and mixing it. And when it gets hard to mix, then I dump it out onto the center and I start kneading it. Now, lots of people use bread machines, and there are some recipes that suggest you don't even need to knead them. You can use a dough hook. I like to knead. So, it's a floury mess, right? And I can take all this out with my wooden spoon, put it on top, because on the counter I'm going to knead it all together. So set that aside. I'm going to take my dough scraper. I didn't have one of these for many years. I didn't know what I was missing. I like it a lot when I'm doing bread. I like it a lot more when I'm doing clay. There's a lot of similarities between kneading bread and wedging clay. So now I'm kneading and I'm gathering it together and getting all this flour in. It's still sticky. See how it sticks to my fingers? And that's the way it's supposed to be. If it gets too stiff, your bread might be dense and hard. Now, when I first started, the instructions told me to knead it for 10 minutes. And it may be that that's what I had to do when I was a 14-year-old girl. I'm adding some more flour because that's so sticky. It's not what I have to do now that I am a grown-up person who's a potter and am used to wedging clay, which is the same basic process, except with a much harder material. So I'm kneading it around until it makes a nice firm ball. And I used to say that and I used to wonder, what did they mean by a ball? Mine never looked like a ball. But you can see it's not as sticky now. It's still not quite sticking together. It needs some more kneading. But because of the gluten in the bread flour, it's really holding together and it's elasticy. It's sticky. That's the way bread's supposed to be so that it can rise. I've got almost all the flour off my counter. I have a nice, slightly tacky to the touch, big ball here. And I can stop kneading it anytime I want. And I think this looks about right. So now I'm going to put a little bit of oil over the top of it. And I'll cover it with plastic wrap and I'll leave it to rise. The rise depends on the situation where you're in, how warm it is. But my rises usually take about an hour. And so I'm going to cover this with plastic wrap and we'll be back in an hour.